Now, I don't want to get too far ahead of the story, but I noticed that you spoke movingly about both Maynard Jackson when he passed and Governor John West when he passed.
Sure.
What about these two men?
Maynard, it's kind of interesting. Maynard, when I ran for office in 1970, I don't know why, but we wanted to have this dinner to raise some money. I was getting ready to run for the House of Representatives. And we were thinking about a big name. Maynard at the time, I think, was maybe vice mayor of Atlanta. And we issued an invitation asking would he come speak. And he came. Came to Charleston, the old Fort Sumter Hotel. We had this big thing down there. My mother and father all came. It was 400 or 500 people. No black person had ever done anything like this in Charleston before. And the next morning, Maynard needed to go to Columbia. And so I drove him to Columbia. I had a little '69 Mustang without air conditioning. We got in that car and, made it, got there, he filled up the whole passenger side of the seat and his voice just resonated through that car. And we had a conversation that day, some of which I have never talked about and will only write about. But here's this guy who was bigger than life almost. His voice, it was just, and he, I don't know, it was a great experience for me. I don't know what I would have thought of him had I never taken that ride with him. But I just got emotionally attached to him, and I always was. And so when he died, it was like a little bit of me died because he spoke that night just about things in general. He didn't know me. Got to know me a little bit in that automobile ride, which was an hour and a half, 2 hours. And we stayed in touch over the years. Even when he was no longer mayor and out in the business world, we stayed in touch. And it was a loss for me when he died.
What about
John West?
Yeah, Governor West.
John West was interesting. You never know why things happen. And I never knew. I ran for the House in 1970. John West was running for governor. I met him in 1969. I'll always remember the day I met him. It was August 16, 1969. That's the day my second daughter was born. John West accepted my invitation to come and speak at the groundbreaking for a self-help housing program that I was doing in Charleston County. And when he got there, he told me after the program, he said, explain to me what you're doing here. And so I explained to him exactly what the concept of the program was and what we were doing. This was out in Adams Run, South Carolina, Young's Island, outside of Charleston. He said to me, he said, I really like this idea. He said, he says, I'm going to run for governor next year. If I get elected, I want you to consider coming and working for me. Well, that next year, he ran, and then I ran for the South Carolina House. Won the primary. Nobody expected me to win. I ran a very populist kind of campaign. I was a former school teacher there that students really liked, and they all got involved in my campaign. The morning after the primary, all of this comes, let's get to how my wife gets into some of this. The morning after I had just won, we had this great victory. I went into my bathroom the next morning, and there on my sink was a little note from my wife. And the note read, when you win, brag gently, and when you lose, weep softly. So that note had a tremendous impact on me. By the time I left the house that day, I had toned down a little bit. But that fall, in the general election, I was announced the winner around 10 o'clock in the evening. About 3:30 in the morning, and my doorbell rang, and it was a reporter saying, "You better get down to the courthouse, something's going wrong." So I get down to the courthouse, and Emily went with me, and we found that this says rather than being a 500 vote winner, I was a 500 vote loser.
How'd that happen?
Nobody really knows. Nobody really knows exactly what happened. They told me that somebody forgot to carry a 1 in doing some additions or something. I don't remember what it was. Nobody would really explain what really happened. But that next morning, when I went into my bathroom, I wept softly. But that next afternoon, I went up to New York to chill out with a friend. And the next morning, his phone rang. And it was John West on the phone. And so he came to me and says, "Man," says, "John West on the phone." I mean, he was almost trembling. He never even could believe that. So I went to the phone, and John West told me that he wanted to talk to me and asked would I stop through Columbia on my way back to Charleston. And so I flew back into Columbia a couple of days later, and we met. He told me he wanted me to come work for him. And I declined. I told him I don't think I could do that. I thought that my politics was a little more activist than he would be willing to tolerate. He looked at me and he said to me, and I'll never forget this, he says, "Jim Clyburn," he says, "if I were black with as much on the ball that you have, I'd be much more militant than you are."
Oh, really?
I was a little bit embarrassed by that, but I got my second lesson, big lesson in politics that day. When I stepped out of his door, his press person told me, "You got a phone call." I said, "A phone call? Who knows that I'm here?" I figured nobody knew I was there, but Emily, she would be waiting on me to call her. But then I thought maybe she was calling. I went and picked up the phone, and it was a newspaper reporter who says, "Well, are you going to do it?" Well, great lesson in politics. While I'm saying no to the governor, this guy gets up, Phil Gross, who's a great friend of mine now, goes out, calls the reporter, and gave me a real lesson in politics. And so she said to me, she said, "Well, you cannot say no to the governor." Well, that was headline the next day. I was going to work for the governor.
All right.
Yeah. And he was asked about that. I'll never forget. Because a lot of people saw me as being a little more militant than they thought South Carolina would tolerate. And a reporter, I think his name was Hugh Gibson, I'll never forget, asked John West about his appointment of me. And John West's reply was, "We do not leave our wounded on the battlefield." I was the only Democrat that had lost in Charleston that year.
And so you maintained a relationship with West until he died?
Oh, Lord, yeah, absolutely. Very close relationship. We visited often, on the phone, in person. Em and I spent Christmas on Hilton Head every year, and John West moved down there after the governorship, and so during the Christmas holidays, we would visit with him and Lois. But during the year, we'd be on the phone all the time. We'd have lunch together occasionally. Anytime I needed showing up, I would get a little note from him or a phone call from him. Never forget, when I got ready to run for Congress, we had lunch. And he told me he thought I really ought to do it. And just before making the announcement, my youngest brother had some public difficulties that called into question in my mind. John West called me early the next morning and started talking to me about the race. And I said to him, I said, well, Governor, I'm not too sure I'm going to do this now. He says, you know, the headlines that are out there now, I'm not too sure I need to do this. He said to me, he said, you know, he always called me Jim Clyburn as if it were one word. He said, you know, Jim Clyburn says, life would be so simple if we did not have siblings and children. He says, when are you going to announce? And the rest is history.